Hey everyone, after more than 15 years in the business, I finally got a book published. If you want to do me the biggest favor in the whole world, please head over to mikeyop.com and buy a copy. That's MIKEYOPP.com, and the book is named Martyr, and it's about psychics and the history and future of the universe. I wrote it, and I think you'll love it. Hi, this is Mike Oppenheim, and you are listening to Coffin Talk, Interviews with the Living, a weekly podcast that explores how our views on death affect the way we live our life. This week we have Dimitris Xygalatas, and I'm not pronouncing his name correctly because it starts with an X, and he very politely informed me that it was okay to pronounce it that way, so I will let him say it himself, and maybe we'll get into some of the cross-cultural aspects of Greece and America. But in the meantime, what you need to know about him before we start the interview is that he is an anthropologist and cognitive scientist at the University of Connecticut, where he directs the Experimental Anthropology Lab. He's been studying rituals for over 2 decades through a combination of ethnographic fieldwork and scientific experiments. His research has been published in over 100 scientific articles and books, and his latest book is called Ritual: How Seemingly Senseless Acts Make Life Worth Living. Talk about a perfect guest for Coffin Talk. Welcome, Dimitris. How are you?
Hi, Mike. I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. So real quick, as advertised, can you just actually say your last name the way you would say it?
The way I would say it is Xygalatas. And I can assure you this is strange even in Greece. So anybody with that last name is related to me.
Okay, cool. When I was a child, I was obsessed with the letter X, and I would try to invent names with it. And so I love just seeing it. And I like the XY combo. I don't know. I'm a visual language person, but let's see. Normally we ask people how old they are, where they grew up, and what generation they're a member of, if any. So let's start with that.
All right. I'm 45 years old. I'm not entirely sure what generation that makes me part of because I grew up in Greece. So I never used this nomenclature.
Awesome. And which part of Greece did you grow up in?
I grew up in Thessaloniki, which is the second largest city.
Okay.
Not a great many people know about it, but it's a city of about 1 million people up north. It's one of the biggest harbors in Greece as well.
Do you guys have an American culture? Do cities have fun sports rivalries, and are you guys rivals with Athens or anything like that?
Oh, you have no idea. There's nothing equivalent to that in the United States. And this is something actually I've done research on in my lab. We also look at sports fanship. The American context is a bit of an outlier in many parts of the world. This included, those sports rivalries are taken very, very seriously. Let me give you an example. My home team, PAOK Thessaloniki, so their colors are black and white. Their biggest rival, I would use the word enemy, is Olympiakos, a team from Piraeus, near Athens. They're wearing red. Now, you will see that fans of one team have brotherhoods, or rather sisterhoods, because the word is feminine in Greek,
okay.
The word team. They have these affiliations with teams in other countries. And there have been incidents where fans of one team traveled to another country to engage in street fights with their friends' enemies. And in fact, what these associated teams have in common is simply that they wear the same color shirt and that they hate the people who wear the other kind of shirt, the other color.
That is very intense. It only reminds me of a little bit of our gangs in especially Los Angeles, but
absolutely, because when I talk about hatred, I mean real hatred. So there have been murders.
Wow.
Last year, Greece was rocked by a case of a 19-year-old being murdered in cold blood by a group of people. Just stopped him in the street, asked him what his favorite team was, he gave the wrong answer, and he was killed on the spot.
Oh my gosh. So what about unification, with regards to when Greece famously won the Euro Cup in 2004? What happens in that situation?
Oh, well, you can imagine that was a state of collective euphoria. I've lived this 2 times. I lived in 1987 when we won the European basketball championship. Yeah. And at that time, we've always been one of the best basketball teams in Europe.
Yeah, definitely.
But in 2004, when we won the football European championship, nobody expected that. We had never won a single game in the final round, and then we won the championship. So what I remember from that was that I happened to be in Spain at the time. My wife is Spanish. At the time, she was working for a Spanish newspaper, so we were living there. And so I watched the game alone. And right after the end of the final, I started calling my friends and my family, but the phone network was down in Greece because everybody was calling each other.
This is so fun. I love sports. I mean, I could talk about sports for the next 45 minutes with you, and
Me too.
I'm so
You
interested.
want to change topic?
And actually, I do have a follow-up question to that, which is, well, I mean, it's kind of related, but like, when did you come to America and why? Like,
so I had a short spell in the United States, and that was 2008, 2009. I was doing a postdoc at the time. I was in New Jersey. Later, I've lived in many places. I've lived in 7 countries, including Greece.
Wow.
And I moved a lot because of my studies and me becoming an anthropologist. So I've lived in places where I conducted fieldwork, and I've lived in places where I've been a student and later faculty. And in 2014, I got a job at the University of Connecticut, and that's how I ended up in the United States. This is actually the longest spell I've ever had in a single country since in my adult life.
Wow, that's so fascinating. Do you have time, just real quick, can you rattle off the 7 countries you've lived in?
Well, I grew up in Greece. I left Greece for the first time ever. My first time on a plane was when I was in college, and I went to Denmark as an exchange student. I later went back to Denmark to do graduate studies. Later, I went to Northern Ireland, where I did my PhD at Queen's University, Belfast. I married a Spanish woman, so I've lived in Spain, and I also conducted fieldwork in Spain. I spent 3 years in the Czech Republic, where I was hired to set up a new research center. And I've lived cumulatively about 2 years in the island of Mauritius, in the Indian Ocean, where I do my fieldwork. And for the last 9 years, I've been living in the US, and I believe that makes us 7.
Wow, that's incredible. I was a ESL teacher, English as a Second Language, in San Francisco, and I taught mostly people like you, people achieving postdoctorates and things like that to help them refine their English. So I have so much experience with cross-cultural communications, and that, I have a master's in some of that. And the reason I bring this up is that I think we have a lot in common as far as I spent so many years only working with international students and people who travel like you, and I developed such good rapport and such a fondness for just the interchange of cultures. So I'm always extra fascinated by a person who themselves is going to so many different cultures, because you're just getting this web of, they talk about the iceberg theory. You can only see the top of the iceberg of a culture. So I am curious, in all of those travels, did you get into what they call the lower levels of the iceberg in all of those experiences, or were some of them more superficial than others?
Some more than others. Of course, all of these countries I've lived in for at least 1 or 2 years each. So it gives you some insight. But one thing you realize is when you've lived this nomadic lifestyle is that you are not proficient in the pop culture of any one country. And this still happens to me in the United States. I've been here for 9 years, and my students often mess with me because they mention this or that famous actor or famous movie that I'm still not aware of.
That's so funny. Yeah, and I'm 41, so we're the same age. So it's funny because I'm aging out, and I can't understand some of the references, and it's weird and awkward when you grow up in a country to have that happen, let alone when you're traveling. One more cultural question, just because it's something I remember from Greece, and my parents were actually talking about it last night. Correct me if I'm wrong, please, by all means, but is it still the case that nodding in Greece is actually no, whereas in our country nodding means yes?
No, this would be Bulgaria.
Oh, okay.
But the interesting thing is that our word for yes is ne.
That's what I'm thinking of.
And in Bulgaria, the word ne means no, and they nod for saying no, which is very confusing for a Greek traveling to Bulgaria.
Got it. Okay. So I was confused, and that's interesting. And what are I don't want to ask corny questions what's the biggest difference between Greece and America, but I am curious because most of our audience is American. What's a thing about America that you notice about us that's positive that we don't notice about ourselves? I'll start with that.
Well, for me, I came to the United States to work as an academic, and I think this is perhaps the best and at the same time the worst aspect of life in the United States, or at least one of the best and one of the worst. The best being that American universities they really are the best in the world in terms of infrastructure and the human capital that they have. At the same time, that they are by miles the most expensive educational system in the world. So pros and cons.
Yeah. And what about allegations that the academic institution is starting to become like political by nature? And I don't mean taking sides like to talk about that so much as instead of being an honest institution of learning, they're starting to become corrupted by like the needs for financing, which ties into what you just mentioned. Have you seen any of that?
So this too is part of another big problem that I see in the United States that strikes me as really unusual compared to everything else where I've lived. That everything in the United States just has to be politicized and has to be. We're living in such polarized times. When I watch the news, I still cannot believe how partisan all media are in the United States, and that extends to all of our other institutions.
Well, you are on the least partisan podcast of all time, and I assure you that what you just spoke about from your lips to quote-unquote God's ears is the thing I care the most about, which is just trying to help people see how insane it is, because unlike a bad marriage where you can actually get a divorce and never see the other person again, this country can't divorce itself and live with itself. And
Absolutely.
Yes. It's crazy. And it's funny too, because, you know, you mentioned like the distinct sports rivalries in Greece, and of course you have violence there, and of course you guys have your own disagreements, and I'm sure like the financing and economic collapses were difficult, but it's just interesting to like see Americans not see how self-destructive we are right now, especially right now. I'm just going to say that over and over again, right now, because I didn't live before this, but
yeah, unfortunately, I agree with you.
So let's get into anthropology, which is, of course, by my definition that I learned, the study of quote-unquote man, which would not be nationalism in politics. But as far as anthropology goes, like when and why did you become interested in it?
So I like the way you phrase this, because some people, so anthropology is the study of human diversity, and at the same time, it's the study of what makes us all the same, all members of the same species, which is exactly my focus on ritual. Now, how did I come to the decision to study ritual? I guess this goes all the way back to my childhood. Growing up in Greece, I was always fascinated by other cultures, and at the time, there was no internet, so I was growing up in the 80s. There was no cable television in Greece. We just had a couple of TV stations. So my window to the world was, or at least one of my primary windows to the world, was National Geographic. So once a month, I would go with my mother to the city center, and I would buy the issue of National Geographic. It was only in English at the time, which I liked because it allowed me to practice my English. And I would read about all of these fascinating rituals, and I would see the colorful pictures. And in my mind, that was something that was very far away. That was not part of my life at all. But then at some point, I realized that these same types of behavior, these same types of rituals, not just the mundane ones that I would see around me, like the church going and the morning prayer and so on and so forth, but even some of the more flamboyant and extraordinary ones, things like firewalking and things like bloody pilgrimages, they were happening in my own culture. So it was then I started realizing that ritual seems to be human universal. And so the title of my book, or the subtitle rather, exactly conveys that. Things that appear to be pointless, that appear to be senseless, they can be deeply meaningful for human beings. And this is so widespread in the world. There's no society we've ever known that didn't have rituals. So it's so widespread that it begs the question, why? What is it that these practices offer to so many individuals?
Wow.
And that's how that was my motivation for becoming an anthropologist.
That's so interesting, and I really love how your passion for it is it's you can hear it in your voice, and it's definitely translating to me, and I love that because I think ultimately that's what all people need to be doing is pursuing what they're passionate about. So speaking of societies, I think I index books for one of my jobs. And so I often come across the differences between being a culture and a society. Do you see any difference? And if so, what would that be?
Well, one example would be American society right now, which is divided into several subcultures, or at least two main cultures. So when we talk about politics, for example, we can see greater divisions. Now, these terms can be used in more specific ways. In my branch of anthropology, for example, cognitive anthropology, people have devised ways of measuring cultural agreement. But of course, the other thing to mention here is that we are members of multiple cultures. Things are not as clear-cut as we might like to think sometimes. So you might be a member of a particular political culture and a particular sports fan culture and a particular generation within that society that has its own culture, or be the descendant of immigrants that have another subculture within that larger context, and so on and so forth.
Cool. So kind of along those lines, and I'm asking with naivety, so if my question is unanswerable, please just say so, but what is the oldest society that is recognized by modern anthropologists versus when did humans start according to anthropologists, modern anthropologists? Hey everybody, I just want to thank you so much for listening to the show. Our numbers keep growing and we have a premium package, and it would really help us out if some of you loyal fans would head over there and sign up. You get bonus monthly podcasts, you get a book I wrote, and you also get extra essays and other content. So please head over to mikeyop.com, that's MIKEYOPP.com, and sign up today.
So this is a very complex question to answer. Some might argue that the first societies come about once we have permanent settlement and things like farming. Perhaps not everybody would give the same answer, but I might pinpoint to that. And this is where we begin to see the role of ritual already at the beginning of the very first human societies, the very first human civilizations, the importance of ritual. There's one particular site that I mentioned in my book, and this site is called Göbekli Tepe. It's found in present-day Turkey. It's near the Syrian border. And this site might change everything we thought we knew about human prehistory. What we have there is, it's a massive site. It's something like the size of 9 football stadiums, if I'm not mistaken. And across that area, you have multiple, at least 20 mega structures. Each one of them is what we would call a temple. And each one of them was constructed by these gigantic monoliths that can weigh about 20 tons each. They had to be carved and carried from a nearby quarry. They would have taken hundreds or thousands of individuals working for years to build those. And the date of that site is over 12,000 years old. And what is astonishing about this? So think about this. This is twice as old as Stonehenge. This is 3 times as old as the Egyptian pyramids. But the most astonishing part about this story is that there is no known city at that point. There is no permanent settlement. There is no farming. There is no writing. We haven't invented the wheel, pottery, and any of the hallmarks of civilization. Instead, what we see is that first people construct this mega monument, and then a few centuries later, they begin to establish permanent settlements, which suggests that this was used by hunter-gatherers. Sometimes they would travel thousands of miles as pilgrims to go and visit that site, and they would have had the kinds of high arousal ceremonies that people might have in a stadium today, perhaps. And the archaeologist who uncovered this site, Klaus Schmidt, a German archaeologist, he coined the famous phrase, "First came the temple, then the city." And if he's right, that means that everything we thought we knew, that the impetus for the establishment of the first cities was the search of food, which actually doesn't make much sense because hunter-gatherers had a much more balanced diet and a healthier lifestyle compared to the back-breaking labor that early farmers had to put in. So we see the effects on their health were devastating. They lost about 4 inches in height. Their lifespan was shortened. The infant mortality increased. They were exposed to all sorts of pathogens, and of course raids, and there was inequality. Why would they go into all of this trouble? They didn't get any direct benefits. So Schmidt suggests that the need that the urge that led them to establish the first cities were not material needs. They were spiritual needs. It was because they wanted to get together to practice those rituals, and the building of those sites and the maintenance of those sites required permanent settlement.
Wow, you're so articulate and you answer your questions so well. When you talk about the lifespan of humans and then like the inches and stuff like that, I can kind of imagine how you're like using carbon dating and bones and stuff for evidence of that, but I am curious, like, how do we actually know the lifespans of people? Is it just from records?
Yeah, it's from archaeological findings. So the skeletal findings, for example, they can be dated, and we can get approximations for their age. So we see that way more children are dying.
Okay.
Younger adults are dying. We have evidence from their teeth, for example. They have way more caries and all kinds of problems with their teeth. Their bones, they're losing bone structure. They have tuberculosis. So they have all sorts of other diseases. Findings from their water supplies, so their wells, they're finding that they're contaminated with fecal matter, and those are coming both because both humans and their animals are living in such close proximity that there's a great increase in communicable diseases and so on and so forth. There's a wealth of evidence that suggests that this particular move from a nomadic lifestyle to the earliest farming societies had devastating effects, and in fact, those effects we can see them going on for thousands of years. In fact, the average height that we lost through that transition, we didn't recover it until about 100 years ago.
Wow.
The global population was shorter for thousands of years after that transition.
Okay, this next question is very much related to your area of expertise, which is what can you tell me about ritual sacrifice? So, like, I know we've read about, like, the Azteca and Mayan cultures and stuff like that. I'm just curious, like, how early does that happen, and do you have any theories or explanations for it?
It's a very common thing to hear when you ask people why they engage in their rituals. People will talk about tradition, and they will talk about they will defer to religion and custom and so on. But every so often you hear people say that they have a certain expectation that there's this relationship of exchange, and this comes very natural to human beings. Although theologians might tell you that you should worship in a particular way, that you just worship for its own sake and you don't expect anything back, but people who practice rituals in their everyday lives, they often have this idea that you need to give something in order to get something. That's where this idea of sacrifice comes from. Sometimes we might call it sacrifice. So Hindus, for example, they used to sacrifice animals. They still do in some parts of the world. Today, those sacrifices have been, for the most part, substituted by fruit offerings. But even to this day, they might refer to them as a sacrifice. So you can, if you extend this to its extreme, then you might see how things like human sacrifices might also come about. There's this idea that comes very intuitive to our brain that you get what you pay for, right? So when you go into extreme lengths, so that could be self-sacrifice, when you engage in a very painful ritual, for example, or when you sacrifice something that has a lot of material value, and of course, what could be possibly more valuable than human life, that the rewards will be of equal magnitude.
That makes so much sense. This is such a leap in my line of questioning, but I am curious, am I making is my metaphor fair to the spirit of anthropology that one could even look at, like, I'll be specific to America, our obsession with driving our own cars and our fear of autonomous vehicles is almost like a ritualistic thing. Like, the ritual of driving is so ingrained in the American psyche that to give up that for autonomous vehicles would just be like too big of a change in ritual. Is my metaphor fair at all to you?
Well, it is fair in the sense that quite a lot of what we do as a species is driven by this cultural inertia that you're talking about. So we prefer what we know. There's this anecdote that Ford, when they asked him when he invented the car, when they asked him about it, he said that I just went ahead and did it. I didn't conduct a survey to see what people wanted, because if I had asked them what they wanted, they would have asked for faster horses.
Wow. That is so powerful. That you just nailed like a million ideas in my head down in a cool way. That really helps me see something that I'm trying to connect. So, all right, well, let's go ahead and get into your personal philosophy, and then we'll come back to like what you do for a living and your passion. So we always ask every guest, what do you think happens when you die? And I like to add extra goodies to different guests for different reasons. So with you, I'm going to have you answer that first, and then I'd like you also to answer what is the most fascinating perspective of death from all of your research that you've done that you've learned about.
Mm-hmm. So from my personal philosophy, I am a materialist, so I don't think there's an afterlife. I don't expect there to be an afterlife. When I'm dead, I think I'll just be gone. Now, what is the most fascinating perspective that I've drawn from the study of rituals with regards to death? I think the key thing here is that funerary rites, which are found in every human society, and in fact beyond, we can talk about other species perhaps having funerary rites.
Cool.
The most important takeaway is that they're not for the dead; they're really for the living. They offer tangible benefits to the living. And this is why you will see that in certain societies. So, for example, I've been to the famous site in Petra, in Jordan, the one from Indiana Jones on the cover of National Geographic. And much like most people who go there, I thought that these palatial structures that are carved inside the stone, now there are thousands of those. I thought that these were the dwellings of the people who lived there, the Nabateans. But as it turns out, the Nabateans lived in tents made of goat skin. And as their dead were inhabiting these elaborate palace-like structures. And this is not the only place where I've seen this. I've been in parts of Madagascar, for example, where the local tribes people would live in huts made of reed, which were very vulnerable to the cyclones that regularly strike the island. But then they would have these brick and mortar buildings for their dead. And this shows how important it is for us, for the living, to take care of our dead.
That is so cool. That's such a great anecdote. So in your opinion, which I respect to the ends of the earth and back, let's say that we don't do a good job of recording everything we're doing. Like, I don't know, something erases all the digital records from this era. What do you think a future modern anthropologist digging through like the ashes of our culture would say about our culture? Like, what's something that like will be evident by what you have access to with older cultures now?
That's a wonderful question. And I think this is a question that anthropologists can use when they teach their students, for example, about interpreting data. There's a famous paper in anthropology that we typically assign to our students, and it talks about the rituals of the Nasirima. And the Nasirima are Americans spelled backwards. So you begin to read that paper, and it talks about the ritual of this exotic tribe that, in fact, it describes American customs. But you don't realize, perhaps you will finish the paper and you will still not realize, hopefully you will, that it is your own culture that it describes. And one thing that is relevant in that paper is that it talks about all of these kinds of rituals. For example, the rituals of related to the bathroom. Mm-hmm. We have all these porcelain structures in our bathrooms, and we have mirrors and all kinds of bells and whistles, and we spend so much time there. So if an archaeologist was to find, let's say, the proverbial anthropologists from Mars, for example, came here and saw our society or future archaeologists, one thing they would infer is that we have an awful lot of rituals surrounding body excretions, which is not the way we see it, right?
Yeah.
And that makes you wonder, what else might we get wrong? When we look at findings from the past, what is it that we might be getting backwards? We simply don't know. And that's why archaeologists try to be very, very careful when they make claims about the interpretation of their findings.
This podcast was designed to let people have a vehicle to talk about their spirituality and or the lack thereof. We don't care. We're not trying to promote Christianity over Judaism or vice versa, nor do we hate atheists or love, different people from different cultures. But I am curious, have there ever been like distinctly atheistic cultures that you've come across?
I would have to say no.
Okay.
There's none that we know of. Actually, I'm pretty certain. No. In fact, what you see is that even when you have totalitarian governments that try to suppress religion, mm-hmm. as it happened in the USSR or in China, all you see is that a huge backlash, and later when things change, a resurgence of religion, or you see underground forms of religiosity. So this is yet another piece of evidence that shows that religious ideas come very naturally to us. And of course, the popularity of various spiritual practices in the West. So as organized religion perhaps is retreating, you'll see that people turn more and more towards new types of rituals, new types of spiritual expressions. So yeah, the answer would be not only that I haven't seen, that I don't know any that have existed, but my prediction is that there will not be any in the future.
That's so cool. And you actually answered my follow-up question, which is, do you have any prediction? But also in that same vein of thought, what do you think about people in America? Not like what do you think about them, but this idea I keep seeing and hearing in social media, which is science is the new religion. Do you think there's any merit to that? And do you have anything to say about that?
I don't think that's a fair description. I think it's important to keep definitions precise, because if we start describing everything as a religion, then that means nothing is a religion.
Yeah.
I mean, for science to be a religion, it would have to have all sorts of things. It would have to have supernatural agents, deities. Sure, science has its heroes, of course, but that's not the equivalent. It would have to have all kinds of rituals that are performed for their own sake. Of course, you could point to the rituals of academia, but I don't think it's at the same level. One key element there is that the element of the supernatural with science is supposed to not discuss. I'm not going to say it's meant to debunk. That's not what it's meant to do. But it's not asking that question to begin with.
That was a fantastic answer. You blew my mind with that. That was great. You should probably have a show where you help people calm down and get along, because your answers are great and I really appreciate them. I don't know if you can tell, but my line of questioning is to provide our audience with like helpful philosophical advice that can help them see how their own past might be related to other ancient cultures and all that, and just kind of how conflict seems to be a part of almost any culture and any society.
Yes.
And along that lines, what is something that you wish more people knew from anthropology? Something that's like pretty regularly accepted, or at least something that you believe strongly in?
One thing I wish more people knew is just the breadth of methods in anthropology. So there's a saying that might seem like a platitude, but it goes that anthropology is the most humanistic of the sciences and the most scientific of the humanities. But this is certainly something that has informed my work. In my line of research, I try to begin by taking people's claims seriously. I don't dismiss them. I don't take them at face value either. I believe in the importance of careful scientific examination of the evidence. But for example, when people say that they perform their rituals because it helps them soothe their fears and their anxieties, this is something worth studying. When they say that their rituals bring them together, or when anthropologists say that, this is something worth studying. And by studying this, we come to not only appreciate what makes us all human, but also we come to find, hopefully, ways of soothing our anxieties, ways of bringing people together rather than set them apart, and so on and so forth.
Wow, that was great. Thank you. Just a couple more questions, specifically to you and about you, so not about larger cultures. When you say that you're a materialist, and I don't mean like someone who only cares about money, but that when you die, you're just gone and you're going to perish. I'm always curious, does that affect your morality at all? Like, because a lot of people seem to be moral specifically out of a fear of a punishment after life or out of a desire for a reward. Since you believe in neither, how does that affect your morality?
Yeah, I don't think that's who we are. So I don't think that we, at least that's my hope, that we don't need the fear of punishment to be better people. I mean, if anything, through studying anthropology and through studying both the wonderful diversity across human cultures, but also all of the kinds of things that make us fundamentally the same, that make us all human, that comes with a great appreciation of the human condition. And that in itself is a great incentive to be just a good person.
That's so cool.
I'm not saying that I'm necessarily a good person, but I am saying that I do appreciate moral sentiments and moral values. That's for others to judge.
I will keep your caveat in, even though I don't think it was necessary. I will keep it in just because you're a humble man, and I want to make sure that our audience can hear that. However, with that said, I don't think you sound or come across as someone who's having issues with that. And also, even with how you talk about delicate issues that I brought up and asked you.
So just to insist on that a little bit, because I think this is important. So I'm not saying that anthropology makes me a good person, but I am saying that you should study anthropology because it really can help you become a better person by making you appreciate both human diversity and the kinds of things that unite us.
Wow, that's so powerful. And I'm out of official questions to ask you. I have a million questions I could ask you about sports and about anthropology, but they wouldn't really fit into the structure of this podcast. So I know your time is precious, but I always ask guests before they part, is there anything you want to tell our audience? Just anything you want to get out?
So since we've been talking about ritual, the thing to note here, and we touched upon this already, but the thing to note is that the human need for ritual, I take it to be universal, and I believe that it both predates religion and extends far beyond religion. So what we see, because people ask me all the time, do you think that we're losing traditional rituals, and what are the effects of that? And what I see happening is that even as organized religion is retreating, in parts of the West at least, the human need for ritual remains the same. So what we see instead is that people turn to other ways of expressing that, of fulfilling that need, perhaps by engaging in the collective rituals that take place in a rave or a rock concert or a football stadium or a political rally or a college graduation, and so on and so forth. And this can happen for better and for worse.
Wow, that was so great. Dimitris, thank you so much. This has been an incredible interview. I was looking forward to it. My brother is a huge fan of yours, and he's himself an anthropologist, but not currently in academia doing that. So just thank you so much. And to anyone who needs information about him, it'll be in the notes. And he's very Googleable, and he is currently in Connecticut, and he is a professor here. So if you're young or even older and you want to study anthropology, you could look into that. And I think your last answer is a great reason for people to consider that. So thank you again for coming on our show, and thank you to everyone who listens. As always, my name is Mike Oppenheim, and the best way to support the show is to head over to mikeyop.com, MIKEYOPP.com, and sign up for free for the weekly newsletter. And I would be making my wife very angry if I also didn't mention that my new book is out. It's fiction, it's about psychics, it's fun and interesting, and you should buy it. Thank you again, Dimitris, and thank you to everyone, and we will see you soon. When I hear this song,